There is a story we have been telling ourselves for a very long time. It is a story of selection, of purpose, of a guiding hand moving through the corridors of deep time, reaching down into the tangled branches of the evolutionary tree and lifting one particular lineage above all the others. It is a comforting story. It is also, when you examine the actual physics of what happened on this planet over the last 3 million years, a story that dissolves completely under scrutiny, leaving behind something far more unsettling, far more magnificent, and far more true. The question embedded in that title is itself the problem. It assumes an agent, it assumes intent. It assumes that the disappearance of Neanderthals, of Denisovans, of Homo erectus, of Homo heidelbergensis, and of every other coexisting branch of the human family was the result of a deliberate act of cosmic favoritism, a kind of biological lottery with a conscious referee. But the universe does not operate that way. The cosmos has no favorites. The laws of thermodynamics do not care which primate carries the most compelling genome. And what actually unfolded across the frozen landscapes and shifting coastlines of this planet was not selection by intention, it was selection by physics, brutal, mathematical, and absolutely indifferent. Imagine a massive stone plateau, ancient and cold, stretching out under an open sky during a planetary superstorm. On that plateau, someone has lit dozens of separate candle flames. Each flame burns with its own particular character. Some are large and bright, consuming their fuel with tremendous intensity. Some are smaller, more contained, flickering with a quieter chemistry. They burn at different points across the plateau, separated by distance, by rock formations, by the simple geography of their placement. And then the storm comes, not a symbolic storm, a real one, with real chaotic wind dynamics, with real thermodynamic turbulence moving in unpredictable, mathematically complex patterns across that stone surface. The wind does not look at the flames and decide which one deserves to survive. It does not evaluate the beauty of each flame or the worthiness of its particular chemistry. The wind simply moves according to fluid dynamics, according to pressure gradients, according to the brutal arithmetic of atmospheric physics. And one by one, in no particular order of cosmic significance, the flames are extinguished, not because they were lesser, not because they failed some divine test, but because the localized fuel supply ran low at precisely the wrong moment, because the specific geometry of nearby rock formations failed to provide adequate shelter, because the turbulence reached a particular intensity at a particular location on the plateau. And somewhere in one corner of that vast cold stone, one flame, barely surviving, clinging to the last fraction of its wick with the most precarious of holds, makes it through to the moment when the storm shifts just enough. That flame is us. But to understand why, we have to go deeper than metaphor. We have to go into the actual physics that govern this survival, beginning with the most fundamental constraint of all biological existence, which is energy. Every living system is a thermodynamic engine. It takes in energy from the environment, converts it into biological work, and exhausts heat into the surrounding world. This is not a metaphor. This is a literal description of what your body does every second of your existence. And the efficiency of that engine, the ratio of useful biological output to total energy consumed, determines whether a biological system can maintain itself against the relentless pressure of entropy that is always pushing every organized structure back toward disorder. Neanderthals were, by any physical assessment, extraordinary beings. Their skeletal structure alone tells a story of massive, sustained metabolic investment. Their barrel chests, their dense bones, their heavily muscled frames were the result of hundreds of thousands of years of adaptation to cold, demanding environments. But those same physical characteristics carried a thermodynamic price tag that was, under normal environmental conditions, entirely manageable. The European megafauna was abundant. The caloric resources needed to sustain those massive frames were available. The thermodynamic equation balanced, and then it stopped balancing. Between roughly 40,000 and 25,000 years ago, a cascade of environmental pressures converged on the European and Middle Eastern landscapes that Neanderthals called home. Glacial cycles tightened. Megafauna populations crashed. The dense, reliable web of caloric resources that had sustained Neanderthal metabolic demands for over 200,000 years began to contract with a speed that left almost no room for adaptation. And here is where the physics becomes merciless. A biological system optimized for high caloric throughput cannot simply downregulate its energy requirements when the surrounding energy landscape contracts. The muscles do not shrink on demand. The dense bone structure does not dissolve in a generation. The metabolic floor, the minimum caloric intake required just to maintain biological function without deterioration, remains stubbornly high even as the available energy in the environment plummets. Nature does not negotiate with thermodynamic liabilities. It simply removes them from the calculation. This is the first profound truth that the universe teaches us through the Neanderthal extinction. High-maintenance biological systems, those that require large, continuous energy inputs to sustain their structural complexity, become catastrophically vulnerable the moment the surrounding energy landscape shifts downward rapidly. The very physical investments that made Neanderthals such formidable survivors in one set of environmental parameters became the precise mechanism of their elimination when those parameters changed. This is not tragedy in any human sense. It is physics operating with complete consistency and zero sentiment. But thermodynamic pressure alone does not explain the full picture. To understand the deeper mathematics of why entire human lineages were swallowed by time, we need to move into the domain of information theory and the physics of genetic entropy. A population of organisms is not simply a collection of bodies. It is a living information system. Every genome carries a signal, a compressed library of survival-relevant data encoded in the specific sequence of base pairs that defines each individual. And like any information system, a biological population is subject to the laws of statistical entropy. When a population grows large and geographically connected, the genetic signal remains rich and diverse. Random mutations that prove harmful are diluted across the broader information pool before they can propagate catastrophically. Novel mutations that prove advantageous can spread with efficiency through a well-connected network of interbreeding individuals. But isolation changes everything. The Denisovans, as far as our current understanding reaches, appear to have existed in relatively small, geographically fragmented groups scattered across the vast terrain of Asia. Homo heidelbergensis populations were similarly discontinuous. And when you take a population and fragment it into small, isolated pockets, you subject it to the mathematical inevitability of what geneticists call a bottleneck effect, but which is more precisely understood as the systematic erosion of genetic information bandwidth under statistical pressure. In small, isolated groups, random genetic drift dominates over natural selection. Harmful variants accumulate not because they are favored, but because the information pool is too small to reliably filter them out. Beneficial variants may never spread beyond the small local group where they first appear, because there is no connected network through which they can propagate. The genetic signal degrades. The population becomes, in information theoretic terms, a fading transmission, carrying less and less adaptive data with each successive generation, growing more vulnerable to environmental shocks, to pathogens, to the kind of rapid ecological shifts that a genetically rich, broadly distributed population could absorb with relative ease. This is genetic entropy in its most literal sense, not the entropy of thermodynamics, though the mathematical formalism is closely related, but the entropy of information systems, the tendency of isolated, poorly connected data networks to degrade toward noise, and eventually toward silence. The coexisting human species that vanished were not merely outcompeted in some simple contest of brute capability. Many of them were mathematically consumed by the quiet, relentless degradation of their own informational architecture, rendered fragile by isolation, by small numbers, by the cold arithmetic of probability operating on insufficient data. And this brings us to the third and perhaps most remarkable truth that the physics of our survival reveals. Because if thermodynamic efficiency and genetic bandwidth explain the vulnerabilities of those who did not make it, they do not fully explain why we did. For that, we need to talk about something that looks, on the surface, like a sociological observation, but is, at its foundation, a principle of kinetic physics and information propagation. Homo sapiens developed something genuinely unprecedented in the history of this planet. Not larger brains in absolute terms. Neanderthals had brains of comparable or even larger volume. Not greater raw physical capability. By most individual physical metrics, Neanderthals were almost certainly superior. What Homo sapiens developed was the capacity for highly flexible, rapidly modifiable, long-range collective information processing. Language with the syntactic richness to convey not just immediate observations but abstract concepts, conditional scenarios, accumulated historical knowledge, and future planning horizons. Symbolic representation that allowed survival-relevant data to persist across generations, not just in genes but in cultural artifacts, in stories, in encoded practices that could be transmitted without biological inheritance. Think about what this means from a purely physical standpoint. A single Homo sapien is a moderately capable biological system, but a network of Homo sapiens linked by rich, flexible communication channels becomes something qualitatively different. It becomes a distributed computational system where the relevant data about resource locations, environmental hazards, seasonal patterns, and technological innovations is not locked inside any single individual or any single group, but flows continuously across vast geographic distances, available to any node in the network that needs it. The kinetic efficiency of this system, for reducing local entropy, for maintaining biological order against environmental disorder, is dramatically higher than anything achievable by an isolated group operating solely on locally available information. This is entropy reduction at the collective scale, and it proved to be the decisive physical advantage. The contrast with other human variants is stark, precisely because it is not a contrast of intelligence or worthiness or cosmic favor. It is a contrast of network architecture. A highly capable, isolated system, however impressive its individual specifications, cannot compete over geological time with a less individually impressive but massively networked system when the environment becomes sufficiently volatile. The distributed network absorbs local shocks that would destroy isolated nodes. It routes around failures. It propagates innovations at speeds that isolated groups cannot match. It behaves, in the language of complexity theory, as a far more robust adaptive system capable of maintaining its organized state against a far wider range of environmental perturbations. This is why we are here, not because a cosmic hand selected us, but because the particular configuration of our communicative and cognitive architecture happened, by the narrowest of margins, to produce a network capable of sustaining itself through a series of environmental pressures that extinguished every other version of us. We were not the best. We were, at one particular moment in deep time, the most connected. And here is what I find genuinely staggering about all of this. The realization that our survival was not ordained, that it was not the inevitable expression of some grand cosmic preference for our specific lineage, does not diminish the fact of our existence. It makes it more astonishing. Every single one of us is here because of a chain of thermodynamic contingencies so improbable, so dependent on specific configurations of energy, information, and network structure, that it constitutes one of the most remarkable accidents in the 4-billion-year history of life on this planet. We are the one flame that made it through the storm, not because the storm chose to spare us, but because, in one corner of the plateau, the fuel lasted just long enough and the wind shifted just so, and the geometry of the stone offered just barely enough shelter to let a single, fragile, improbable spark survive into the silence that followed. That silence is the universe, and we are what it accidentally produced. Not chosen, not destined, just extraordinarily, precariously, almost incomprehensibly lucky. And if you find that realization more beautiful than any story of divine selection, then you are finally seeing the cosmos clearly in all its cold, magnificent, indifferent truth.